Hello, welcome. These lights are really bright, but I've got a whole stage, and there's lightsabers behind me. So now that you've all come and sat down, I'm gonna invite you to stand up, actually. So stand up, invite you to stand up. This is where we're gonna get our wiggles out before we get started. And we're all here to connect, so take a minute, say hello to whoever you're sitting by, find someone to connect with. High five. All right. Did you meet somebody new? Awesome. All right, so everybody get settled in. Find a seat, get settled in. Okay, now you're gonna take out your number 2 pencil. You all brought one, right? Okay. And the assessment will begin shortly. So, no, just kidding. If you're here for the gender gap and tech session, you're here in the right place, in the right ballroom. I invite you to be present for the next hour or so and buckle up because we're going on a journey. Okay, do I have slides here? All right, so it's story time, and I've got quite the story for you. It's often been said that a good story needs conflict and resolution, tension and release, mystery and revelation. Oh, this tale, The Gender Gap in Tech, has it all. As we make our way through the pages, prepare yourself for truth bombs and bright ideas. We're going to get vulnerable with you, and you might feel uncomfortable, but that's okay. That's all a part of learning and growing. You're the expert of your own experience. Okay, so hello, I'm Missy Ganson from Grinnell College. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm here with my co-pilot, CIO Dave Robinson.
All right, so I'm Dave Robinson. I use he, him, his, and I'm the Chief Information Officer at Grinnell College. Grinnell College is a small private liberal arts college in Iowa, very conveniently located equidistantly, give or take, between New York City and Los Angeles, which we're very proud of. And I am honored in one of my roles is to lead the Information Technology Services team. We're a team of around 50 when we are fully staffed. And we are hiring, and I accidentally put in a link to our careers page in the slide deck at the end. So if you like this talk, go there. If you don't, tell someone else to go there. And we are about 34% female. So just for some context is what we're going to talk about today. Kind of a heads up, the way, as you probably guessed already, this presentation isn't going to be the typical type of presentation that you might expect to see. And we're going to try and combine lots of different styles, so there'll be some narrative, some quantitative data, some qualitative data as we go through and explain or share our experiences and stories and hopefully provide some hints and conversation starters as we go through. To that point as well, there is not going to be a Q&A section at the end, so I'm warning you up front. We have a slightly different activity to replace that. And one of the key reasons for that is what we want to try and promote, again, you may have got the hint already with Missy's introduction, is the importance of reaching out and speaking with other people to get perspectives and then implementing what you learn. And so we're going to be using that as a theme as we go through. I also need to, I think, identify that, as you'll see, this presentation is the mix of a stereotypically introverted CIO with a phenomenal marketing communications expert, and we are going to work to meet somewhere in the middle as we go through. And if we go back to the slides, I think my first point of advice for everybody is be very careful what photographs you give to a marketing communications specialist, because you're never quite sure when it might appear on a huge screen in a public presentation.
Okay, well, I do enjoy embarrassing Dave from time to time. There we go. My full-time job is I work in our IT department. Yet some days I still don't believe it. Even after being here for a few years, I still find myself questioning, do I really belong here? I mean, my perspective and background is vastly different than most of my colleagues, and well, I'm a woman. Most of my colleagues in this field look more like a Dave than me, and I'm really fortunate that I get to work with an amazing Dave who is quick to remind me that I do bring value to our team and that really I should just get back to work. I mean, he is my boss after all. So it turns out that my feelings are not uncommon. I'm like a lot of women in the field. As a matter of fact, there's a term for it. It's called imposter syndrome or perceived fraudulence. So you're not alone if you have ever felt like an imposter at what you do at work. A lot of people, around 70%, both men and women, will experience this at least once in their lifetime. But truth bomb coming at you, 22% of women are more likely to experience imposter syndrome in the tech world. That's a whopping 79% for women, which I think is vastly underreported. In general, imposter syndrome is a feeling like you're a fraud. You might question your skills, talents, or accomplishments, and even fear you'll be exposed as a phony. Despite evidence of your competence, you might even believe that you don't deserve your success. For me, it turns up as an overwhelming feeling of being out of place, like I don't belong or that I'm not good enough. So, imposter syndrome is particularly prevalent in the tech industry. It's especially common in software engineers, developers, designers, and cybersecurity professionals. It's been said that one of the reasons is because of the pace of change and innovation is so rapid that it's impossible for anyone to keep up with everything. Yet we feel like we should. I suspect many of you can relate to this. It's even more common for women, especially women of color, because of the added pressure to succeed and prove we deserve a place in a male-dominated industry. Turns out that 78% of women in tech say they have to work harder to prove their worth at work. Only 54% of men say the same. And we're tired. There's a ton of articles out there that talk about how to overcome imposter syndrome, like there's something wrong with me. As I sift through all the information and talk to my female colleagues, I can't help but conclude that there may be more to this phenomenon. Given the number of women that this affects in tech, it seems like a normal human response to certain environmental conditions that many of us are facing, like being a woman in a culture rife with gender bias and discrimination. So let's take a moment to look at some examples of what imposter syndrome might look like for a woman in tech. While imposter syndrome is internal, as you can see on the left, there are external negative conditions in the workplace that can double the impact. And now for another truth bomb. Oppressive systems of structured sexism and racism contribute to imposter syndrome. I'm sure you've probably all heard of the term bro culture. Put simply, in the workplace, row culture is where male employees are seen as the default and females as an aberration, which leads to misogynistic and discriminatory behavior against those that are not recognized as the same. And yep, this industry overall has a long-standing history of bro culture and deeply entrenched sexism and racism. So, how did I get here? How did I end up in an IT department, you might ask? It wasn't until later in my career that I stumbled upon this opportunity. I'm gonna share with you my personal journey, and as I do that, Dave's gonna help me with some visuals, because he loves my games. All right, so Dave, get ready.
All right.
So as I talk through my personal story, every time he hears me say something that may be an indication that a tech job could be a good fit for me, he's going to wave a green flag. And every time he hears me say something that may have held me back or was an obstacle for me pursuing a tech career, he is going to wave a red flag. Okay, we ready for this?
No.
Keep Dave on his toes here. Okay, so this is my story. I've always been a curious person. From a very young age, I was fascinated by everyday things, yes. I was curious about why things work the way they do, and you would frequently find me reading, building, or making something. Elaborate Barbie houses and forts were my favorites. I loved learning things and dreaming up new ideas. Still do. In school, I gravitated toward literary pursuits rather than math or science. I guess I just never connected with math or science, maybe because I never had a single female teacher in those subjects. My aunt was an art teacher who helped foster my creative and artistic talents. While I loved being creative, I knew I didn't want to be an art teacher. I had an Uncle Leonard who was influential. He was an entrepreneur, a wheeler-dealer of sorts. It was always an adventure when Leonard let me tag along with him. I keenly watched him creatively solve problems, build relationships with people, and make money.
I'm commenting on that one.
Hanging out with Leonard was my first introduction to business and marketing, and it was exciting to me. In high school, I learned about graphic design. It seemed to be a field made for me, combining both my creative and business interests. So off to college I went to become a designer. Along the way, I got a degree in communications, which is why I like a stage from time to time. My goal was to become an art director. Before I graduated from college, I encountered a crossroad where I could have opted to go into a more tech-related design job. I was offered an internship at a large tech company. This company typically recruited engineering students from my college. And that year, they decided to expand the program to include a design student. The job description sounded amazing. It was perfect for me. But my excitement dissipated as I went through the interviewing process. There was not a single woman as part of the hiring committee, and everything definitely was geared toward male engineers. I don't know if they even spoke my language. I also didn't have a single mentor in my college program who encouraged me to consider the position. Despite being offered the job, most likely as the token female, I ultimately declined the position because I just didn't feel I would fit in, and I thought I might fail. At the time, I didn't know any women who were making a career in the tech sector. After graduation, I started working in the corporate world at a national media company. I spent over 20 years there, starting out as an entry-level designer, working my way up to that art director title. I began in print publications and ended my tenure there, mostly working on digital content. Over the years, technology played a big role in the work I did. I was a leader in helping my company transition from film photography, remember that? Yes, I'm really that old, to digital. And I worked in the early days of how to monetize content on the web. I was always learning new software and apps to be able to bring the latest and greatest to my clients. Yet, I never really considered myself a technology worker. I considered myself a very skilled problem solver, and technology was just like any other tool I might use to solve a problem or realize an idea. After leaving the corporate world, I partnered up with some former colleagues at our own boutique design and marketing agency. My work manifested in helping clients develop strategic marketing plans. I also became, by default, an IT person, now that we didn't have big company resources to rely on. Again, I just viewed my work as problem solving and held on to that deep-seated belief that technological things were just not for me. I had an aha moment and decided to use the methodology I use for my clients to help me figure out what was next. What did I really want to be? What things were important to me? What did I want to learn next? What I discovered was I desired to work with people who also valued learning. I wanted to learn more about how leadership worked in another industry. I wanted a job that would provide me with new challenges and have meaningful problems to solve. I also wanted to surround myself in a culture that cared about people and social justice. So I determined that perhaps a job in higher education might be a good fit for me. Now, nowhere in this equation was technology or IT. You're doing a great job, Dave.
Terrifying, but carry on.
I landed on this opportunity because I was looking for a marketing and communications job in higher education. When I saw the description for my job, I thought, wow, that really describes my skills and competencies, but I'm not a tech person. I don't really think I belong in an IT department. I decided to take a chance and apply anyway. Now, mind you, I would have never applied if I didn't think I met or exceeded all of the qualifications listed. This is very common for women to not apply if they don't 100% believe they meet all the expectations. That is not the same for our male colleagues sometimes. So anyways, that's when I met not one, but two allies, Dave, and the best HR recruiter ever, who probably doesn't even know I'm talking about him. They both listened and guided and reassured me that support would be there for me in this position. And just knowing Dave's history of supporting women in the field made me more comfortable with taking that chance. And so here I am today, standing with my ally on a stage talking about this. And I know me gushing about Dave is making him incredibly uncomfortable right now.
Uncomfortable, but carry on.
But that's what allies do. So, wow. There was a lot of green flags, right? Y'all saw it. Green flags, lots of green flags. Okay, so why didn't I think a tech job was for me? There were so many green flags, probably more than the red flags. Well, for starters, I didn't have a Dave by my side my whole life. But I'm going to tell you some things that I learned. Okay, go to our slide here. Okay, unconscious bias. Yep, I have it, you have it, we all have it. So, unconscious bias are social stereotypes about certain groups of people or individuals that form in your mind, like outside of your own conscious awareness. I think this really played into my mindset you instinctively categorize people and things without just even being aware of it. At the most basic level, I think I unconsciously internalized this idea of what society deemed as acceptable occupations for women. And I just want to point out, if you saw Claire's keynote this morning, she talked about propaganda. This word propaganda. This wasn't always the case, but I think somehow, as I was growing up, I got these messages that, what were acceptable occupations for women. And what's very odd about this is I had a very feminist mother who touted girl power, yet I still somehow internalized this in some way. I think my notion of what I thought working in an IT department was based off of stereotypes. You know what I'm talking about, like the nerdy, well, you fill in the blanks. And I'm continuing to uncover these biases that I have the more I learn. So here's another example. In my role, I have learned a lot about cybersecurity. So just a few short years ago, I thought cyber was boring and was really just about monitoring logs. I mean, although I know some of you might find that exciting, but I was pretty sure that only antisocial people must work in cybersecurity. So it turns out, wow, I was wrong, that cybersecurity is a lot about people's behaviors, and it involves strategy and risk assessment, and those are all things that are actually exciting and not antisocial to me. So who knew? I didn't have any role models. So you heard in my story, I didn't have a single female math or science teacher. And oddly, I'm very much a science person. Yet, I don't know, it just never connected to me. And I often wonder if maybe I had seen a teacher in one of those kind of roles, that maybe that would have changed for me. And I didn't think my skills or experiences applied. I mean, I didn't come from an IT background. I just assumed that because I wasn't always in this space, that maybe what I had to offer wasn't really relevant. And that was definitely wrong. And I didn't have a single mentor that encouraged me to look at tech careers. I also didn't have a professional network of other women working in the industry. I think I just simply was ignorant and didn't know. Okay, so my story, it's not really unique. Many women have similar experiences. So there are some common things that hold women back from tech jobs. And one study named 5 barriers that women experienced were lack of mentors, lack of female role models, gender bias in the workplace, unequal growth opportunities, and unequal pay for the same skills. So what's interesting about this is that these 5 items are universal across generations. So in talking with a sampling of women in higher ed, from baby boomers to Gen Z, every single one of them cited examples from their experience in the tech world that align with these findings. And I have some direct quotes of their experiences that I would like to share with you. So, I really wish I had someone who could have mentored me in career options. I have always been good at math, but thought I could only be a math teacher. I didn't know math could translate into a tech job. When I was working on my computer science degree, I didn't have mentors or role models with a broad range of technology jobs. It was limited to computer programming, which is not my thing. So it was harder to visualize what I might do with my degree. I sometimes don't get the small talk in meetings and find myself questioning if and when I should participate. It just feels uncomfortable. I had to work a job for years to prove myself before finally getting the promotion. And then when I did, I made way less than the guy who formerly held the position. I had a customer service job, but they discovered my IT skills. So I was called upon to help out in IT, but I was never compensated for my contributions. I made substantially less than my male colleagues in IT. Okay, so note that two of these quotes are directly related to pay, and the research backs it up. A study from Hired specifically noted that men are offered higher salaries than women for the same job title at the same company 59% of the time. Okay, so let's dig into this pay gap a little bit more. You probably all know that there's a gender pay gap in the US for all races. On average, 82 cents for every $1 earned by men, according to the recent US Census data. But overall, the wage gap is even larger for women of color. And women in tech are not immune to this wage gap. What's interesting is men seem to be unaware of this. When surveyed, more than 1/3 of men either didn't believe or are not sure there is a gender wage gap. Now, women, I see you. We know it, we live it. Okay, so, Dave, I'm just curious, you're gonna be up here. At what point did you know that tech was the right career option for you, and what made you decide to start champion women in this field?
Alrighty. So I will take the tech part first. So despite what turns out to be many, many hints along the way, it was not until relatively recently that I actually found myself in technology at all. And I started off life as a medical researcher. Winding the clock way back, as you can see, so the picture on the left is me most likely programming in BASIC on my Sinclair ZX, yes, I said Z, not Z, ZX Spectrum, maxing out all 16K of its memory, and about to start the agonizing process of saving the program to the cassette deck through a whole bunch of wailing sounds to the left there. What's interesting though, so when I was trying to find this photograph, I, of course, reached out to my mother to see if she had a copy of it. And what she also found is what I have on the right-hand side here, this newspaper article, which I had never seen before, I wasn't aware of. But is also me in the middle at the top there. And there are a few things that really stood out in this article in particular. The first is that, no surprise to me, my sister is stealing the limelight as usual. So it's in the bottom there, the only kid that's turned around to face the camera, that's my sister. But the other was the discovery that actually my mother was kind of an early tech and equity pioneer as well. So this was an event that she had put together with the mother and toddler group that we were part of. And there's one quote from her in particular that I wanted to read out that really hit me. So she says, "It's important to introduce mothers to computers because there's a lot of apprehension about them. By the time that our children are our age, everything will be run by computers and they'll be as common as the telephone is now." I'm not going to completely date myself, but let's say this was at some point in the 80s. And hopefully it shows that this really kind of solidifies my tech expertise and why I'm up here as a CIO. The other thing I wanted to note as well, in the keynote, Claire put up a video of the Doomsday Project. So I was one of the school kids that submitted content to that, and I have been desperately trying to find one of those laser discs for years. So those are my tech credentials. How about the gender equity side of this? So I started at what is now a terrifyingly embarrassing point, which is way over to the left on this highly technical scale that you see in front of you here. And about 10 years ago, I was in an IT leadership position then. I believed that the reason that there weren't many women around me or in technology was because they weren't interested and didn't want to be there. So that's where I was starting from. And unfortunately, I was by no means alone in that mindset. Whilst there weren't any specific catalyzing events that started to change my mind, I at least kind of credit this to my scientific training, and the way that my brain works is if there's even a slight sniff of something not fitting in, I want to follow that as best I can. And so I think the only way that I can describe me starting to make progress along this continuum was at some point there was a critical mass of hunches that I had to look into. And so I started talking to people, going to conferences, meetings, trying to pin all these bits together and just gaining more interest. And as you can probably imagine, that interest turned to horror somewhat exponentially, and I wanted to get more and more involved and progress further to the right of this line. I also want to take the time to say I'm not anywhere near the right-hand side, but I'm trying, and my aim is just to keep moving in the right direction. So whilst there were no specific, say, catalyzing moments, there are some examples I do want to share that did have impact on me. I have 2 daughters. My youngest on the left there is a thrill-seeking gearhead. On the right, my eldest, actually it looks kind of literally in this image, is having her mind blown by glass art. And even at their young ages, they have experienced some of the same things that I have heard technology professionals talk to me about and that I've experienced in the workplace. And so just a couple of examples of that. At 7 years old, the gearhead daughter came back from a baseball camp. She just started playing softball. She was the only girl at baseball camp. And the first thing she asked when she came back home was, "Why are the boys explaining to me how to hit the ball?" Similarly, eldest daughter is an accomplished soccer player. And actually, just this last weekend, so it was perfect timing for this, she asked after, I'm trying to say soccer, I keep thinking football in my head, so I'm fighting the urge, came back from a practice and explained to us that the boys were trying to explain to her how to kick the football, soccer ball. Then it also happens in other places. Searching for birthday presents, particularly for the daughter on the left. The kind of things that she's really into are the kind of things that when you find it on Amazon, the description has, "birthday present for boys." Not the case. So one of my deliberate moves in kind of finding these realizations was to get more involved in professional organizations that already knew about this, that I could learn from, and then hopefully ultimately contribute to later down the road. So organizations and groups like I Am Her, so I know some of you in the room are familiar with this, for identity and access management professionals. I do what I can to attend those events so that I can learn more and how I can better be an ally, or how I'm not being an ally, and learn from that. And I'm also very honored to be one of the co-chairs of the National Advisory Council for WELD, which is Women for Economic Leadership and Development. There have been a lot of experiences that has provided me, one of which I'll share was a very humbling moment. For context, I'm the only male member of that group. And the first email that I received that was addressed, "Dear ladies," suddenly gave me this moment of pause. And initially it was, "Oh, that's funny." And then it was, "Oh, actually, no, it isn't." Because put the shoe on the other foot, how many times does it happen the other way around? All the time. Some of the other moments that have really stood out to me have been in personal communications. So as I've been deliberately getting more involved in gender equity, gender equality conversations, I've had more personal and deep conversations with women who have shared stories with me that have really driven this further. And there are two examples fairly recently that I wanted to share anonymously. The first was actually from a female vendor who is a technology expert in that particular company, and shared with me that very frequently when on at the booth, on the exhibition floor at conferences, she will approach a man who is obviously looking to get an answer on something, ask if she can help, and they'll say, "Oh, I'm interested in name your subject," and she will start talking and be interrupted and say, "No, I have a technical question." The second example, and the more I've looked into this, the more I realize this is the norm for many cases, which is also somewhat distressing. There's a conversation I had with a woman who described to me in great detail the two different personas that she has to occupy when she's at home and when she's at work, and the homework that she does at the weekend to prepare for the work persona the next day. And when you really start to engage in stories like that, and they are everywhere, they're where you work, they're who you meet with, these are some of those what become catalyzing events to really drive you in to do something about this. So, again, with the caveat from one of my previous slides, I'm not an expert, I'm still learning, but I do want to share some experiences that I have come across, some behaviors that I've identified, and we'll put those together now and a little bit later on in the presentation, also with some hopefully practical tips to help avoid some of these things. One thing I did want to note is when we talk about allyship and allies, I'm focusing a lot on the male ally because that's where I'm coming from here. And certainly we have to identify that, particularly in the technology industry, males, we occupy how to describe it, a gender-conferred privilege. And so that's one angle presenting for this. The other is very much an organizational power structure around men as well. So there's a context to that. At the same time, allyship can also be effectively amplified by women in the room as well. And I will come to that a little bit later on. So there are three high-level areas that I'm going to use to frame some of these observations. They're all kind of interlinked. And so it's not like I can give you 10 points on one, 10 points on another. And you'll see as I go through these, how they fit together. But they really do focus around this idea of actively fighting against imposter syndrome, intentionally including, so obviously in the context here, it's including women. I'll give some examples here. And really taking the time to show the respect for the expertise for the women in the room. I also just want to start by emphasizing something that Missy said earlier on about imposter syndrome. If you're experiencing imposter syndrome, it's not on you to fix it. There's a lot that everybody around you should be doing to help you through that. And one of the big ways that you can help do that is by publicly conveying trust in the abilities of the people that are around you and what they're doing. That might sound obvious, but it has to be a deliberate act that's beyond just the normal environment. So again, actively providing support to fight this imposter syndrome. So I have made a list here, and with apologies to my high school English teachers, I have notes. I'm going to read from them because I want to make sure that I get these points articulated. So there are 5 key behaviors that I have seen and I can identify that in themselves either generate or amplify imposter syndrome. And so these are things to be looking out for so that you can step in and counter them. The first is the failure, particularly in a meeting, to acknowledge a woman's idea. And then even worse from that, when the next step is to pass it off of your own idea. And it still happens. So in that situation, you can amplify that first idea with the huge caveat: make sure that you recognize and acknowledge the source of where it came from so that you're not contributing to the problem. My second point, I've just put mansplaining. Just to clarify, if you find yourself explaining to somebody anything in the area of their own expertise, that's don't do it. But it happens far more frequently, and the more you pay attention to this, the more you see it, as with all of these different behaviors. The next one is one that I probably see, or no, I recognize the most, and that is interruptions while speaking and in meetings. The more you pay attention to this, the more you will see there are far more interruptions when women are speaking than there are of men speaking. So you need to make the space for that conversation. And it's even more apparent when you have a female expert in the room and she is interrupted by somebody who is not an expert in what she's talking about. The next one is mostly a leadership thing or an area, but it can also happen in meetings as well. And that's when women are questioned, or their authority is questioned, or the way that they want to carry something out is questioned or second-guessed. Again, the key here is if somebody has the expertise, you put the trust in that expertise and you look to them for how to accomplish whatever it might be. Don't remove the autonomy from that part of the conversation. And then the last of these behaviors is one that's kind of cultural woven in that you have to be really aware of, and that is to make sure that conversations don't either begin or continue after the meeting is finished and people are starting to move away. So if it is important enough to be in a meeting, then the people who are in the meeting should be having that conversation, particularly if that's a woman who happens to have expertise in the area that you're wanting to talk about. So those are some of the behaviors. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about some of those other themes of, I could have kind of flipped this the other way around, and instead of saying we need to look at intentional inclusion, unfortunately there are a lot of examples of exclusion. And so you kind of look at it from both perspectives. So I've already hinted at this in the behaviors that I just called out, but it's really important to, and I'm going to say it again, include women in the conversation when they have the expertise for that particular topic. I can't underemphasize that enough. But then there are also some things in pseudo-social inclusion around work that are really critical as well. Don't talk differently about women as you would men. That could be appearance, it could be health, it could be family responsibilities, all these things. And where there are particularly long-standing workplace banter, themes, jokes, and this isn't just for women, this is for everybody, that should be part of your new employee orientation so that people know these things. Giving space in discussions for thought. particularly if folks in the room haven't contributed yet to the conversation, is really important. Not everybody wants to dive straight in and give an answer. So read the room a bit, and then if somebody hasn't contributed, consider inviting them up. But a big lesson that I learned was to always ask whether you can provide support before jumping in. I was desperately trying to find it yesterday, and I couldn't. There is an article I've read at some point that talks about the era of allies and trying to be heroes. Allies aren't heroes. Allies are supporters. And then one of the barriers that Missy put up earlier on was not just focusing on women right now, but the career development and opportunities. So be very intentional of including, when an opportunity comes up for a woman to experience something that might be the next step to look at, or something that could be interesting. Make sure that you're including those intentional conversations in professional development plans. And then, I guess the last point that I had on the slide was showing the respect for expertise. All of the things that I've talked about will result in that showing of respect. And I just have a couple of hints here for folks, whether you're a project manager, whether you're leading a meeting, whether you're a CIO, whatever role you have. And this is something not just for women, for everybody, because I will talk a little bit later on. What we're looking for here is a cultural shift. So this has to apply to everybody as well. But if you take the time to explain the background, expertise, values that folks are bringing, contributions, capabilities of everybody that's in that room, you're immediately starting that conversation with an understanding of why everybody is there and why you need to listen and pay attention. And actively express confidence. I can't say that one enough. As a introverted tech Brit, I really have to push myself out of my own comfort zone to try and offer praise and to do that in a focused way. But it is really, really important. Okay, we can go back to the slide deck. I'm not going to walk through this, but it's in the slide deck. Every man should be familiar with this flow chart. And this really is a kind of note to self. You need to be intentional about this as an ally, or if you're just a man working with anybody. I have the source here, and I realized I managed to pick out a BBC-specific reference, so I hope this isn't Britsplaining. But please, take the time, look at our slide deck, and check this out. It is the most accurate representation that I have come across, and a very handy reference.
All right. So, here we go. Okay, so how big is this gender gap anyway? I bet you thought that was going to be slide 1. So, while gender diversity in the U.S. workforce is nearly 50-50, as you can see, there's only about 3 in 10 women for technology jobs. So, and this is really despite efforts to expand female interest in employment in STEM fields and advances in bias awareness and gender equity training. So, yeah, what's going on here? I think the stat from 2022 was 28% of women made up the tech workforce. And I also just want to point out that that entry level, that higher up in the org chart, like CTOs or heads of engineering, you're going to find even less representation of women. And the reality of the situation is that women in tech-related careers has actually decreased in the last few years, and the pandemic has played a role in this. So while the careers and lives of everyone was affected by the pandemic, women in tech were disproportionately affected. And you might wonder why that would be, and the research tells us that women in tech are more likely to lose their jobs than men. Women are more likely to feel a greater childcare burden, and women are simply burned out and want to quit. It's hard work. And as a matter of fact, 20% are thinking about quitting right now. So that's not really very good. So why is it a big deal? I mean, why do we really need more women in tech? I mean, you might be thinking, okay, these jobs are equal opportunity, right? I mean, it's not my fault that more women aren't applying. But I want to point out a few reasons why I think that this is so important. There's a real danger in having half of the population not represented. So we're already seeing how AI can be reinforcing gender bias. And the tech industry is one that exists largely for the needs of people. So if women aren't represented from its core, I think we saw a lot of that in Claire's presentation. So if women aren't represented from the core, then their needs are unlikely to be represented with the end results. And technology is all of our future, and if we're looking for technology to help solve some of our biggest problems, we need a lot of great people to solve these problems, and if we're shorting this field by nearly 50% of the population's intellect, that just seems unacceptable, right? Unacceptable for all of us. The second thing I want to point out is women just see things differently. We bring a different perspective. We bring unique ideas to the table, and that enables better problem solving. Diverse teams tend to develop more innovative ideas. When you have a diverse team, you onboard different methods and strategies for thinking, and that just naturally is going to help people think outside of the box. And it creates an atmosphere where creativity can flourish. And if that's not enough, let's talk about the bottom line. Gender diversity generates more revenue. So one study concluded that corporations who identified as more diverse and inclusive are 35% more likely to outperform their competitors. So I like to point that out. So if you're in the business world and you're about making money, you need to be paying attention here. So what can you do? You might be thinking, wow, this is just a really big problem, and I'm just one person, and I'm pretty overworked, and I'm not sure how I could possibly take this on, but I want to point out that no one can solve this independently. It's going to take a collective approach, and the good news is that we're all here in community right now. So this is where the bright ideas come into play, and so Dave's going to get into some of the details of that.
So they're big goals. And I'm going to wrap up my part of the presentation here with some final kind of observations and actions. I kind of group them into two phases here, like hiring and retention. So I'm going to go through those. From the hiring side, I'm going to jump straight to the punchline. It's the candidate pool that you need to focus on, with a caveat, a big caveat, that if you have, and are confident that you have, an equitable recruitment process that controls for bias and everything else. So you are redacting application materials, you're using equity advocates, you're using gender decoders in your language and marketing. You're not asking for prior salaries for candidates, these kind of things. If you have that down, then the candidate pool is where you need to focus. You need to actively seek diversity for your positions and your candidate pools. And that means a lot of work, but it is worth it, and I can attest to that. So the sourcing is where I think the greatest value in this area can be met. And so it's, again, actively seeking out great candidates. Go to your candidate database of choice, databases of choice, lots of them, whether that's Educause, Careers, wherever. Also look at very specific areas that focus on, we're talking about gender diversity here. I have very strong recommendation. We have used Tech Ladies for our recruitment. It's a phenomenal resource. Their link is in the references section of the slide. And you as the hiring manager, I try and get involved as well in this process, can look through those candidates, or potential candidates, and identify the people that you want to invite to be part of your candidate pool. Don't post it everywhere and say, oh, well, I'm posting in 12 different diversity magazines, and that's not going to do it. You need to make that active step to reach out, say, your CV looks incredible. Your skill sets match what we're looking for. I love what you did in this project example. It would be great to see you, in our interviews. So no mail merges. That doesn't work. Reach out, show that you're committed, and bring in that candidate pool. If you want to step away and kind of take a cynical marketing approach as well, taking that action is going to drive future success in these areas as well, because you're showing that you are actually committed to this and that you've taken the time to look at their materials. So with the pool and the hiring process, there's also the conversion part. So just a couple of quick hints, or not hints, considerations, things to think about. So these relate to how you're approaching the hiring as well. This is a little controversial depending on your institution, but I would say, I'll put it this way, consider being as transparent as you can when it comes to salary and posting a position. Again, institution, politics depending, lots of things, but that's a very powerful message to send. If you are in this position, here is the salary you are going to get. We don't know who that candidate is yet, but that's the position. Show the benefits that matter most when you're advertising as well. So particularly for women, flexibility, benefits that show flexibility, workplace flexibility, and family-related benefits, healthcare. Make sure that that's really clear in your materials, and it's not just buried down on kind of, I don't know what page numbers are on the web, but scroll bar 75% text, wherever, miserable place. Don't require IT or computer science degrees if it's not absolutely 100% unequivocally required for that role. Focus instead on the skills and the competencies that you need in the position. And then run those competencies through your gender decoder to make sure that you're not describing it in a way that will put women off from applying. And reflecting on Missy's experience, make sure that you can get allies in HR as well, because that's quite often where candidates are going to be reaching out first. And that their first contact with your opportunity may not be somewhere under which you have kind of direct control. So from the retention side, actually, I guess it's not retention so much that I'm talking about, but more engagement, and engagement being a driver ultimately to retention. And the bottom line on this is what we're aiming for is to drive that systemic improvement that ultimately creates cultural change to the point that we don't have to have conversations like this because it's just happening. So leadership is a part of this. Allyship is a part of this. Mentioned it briefly early on. There's a role here for female allies as well. But the culture and the cultural norm is the key of where we're kind of aiming towards. So I have another list here of some of the behaviors that we can all look to. Some of these are from a leadership perspective, some of them from an ally perspective, but just some of the things to help move towards that cultural shift. So if you're hiring, or if you're just employing anybody, and you have access to the information, gut check salaries, raises, adjustments. Run the numbers, male, female, and make sure that there aren't any disparities there that you might have missed. Always call out problematic behavior. That takes practice. I'm still not great at it. I try. And particularly when you hear people speaking poorly of female colleagues. A lot of these things start from those small comments. Something that our institution is working towards, but we're not there yet, but we will be, is to provide women with a forum to interact with each other. And once you do that, don't kind of float it away on an iceberg and like, okay, oh, we did that. Make sure that you check back in with that group and get that group's assessment on climate and culture so that you can help, again, from that ally perspective. And reinforce workplace flexibility. Again, you may have some political fun in some of these conversations here, but hopefully from this presentation and all the research that I know that you're all going to do afterwards, there are so many reasons that you can provide to HR or whomever else that you need to why workplace flexibility is such a good and important thing that would be able to push that. This benefits all employees, but most likely benefits women more. The next one, I wrote it down, and I thought, is that just too obvious? But I'm going to say it anyway, that we need to make sure that we're interacting with all our colleagues as equals. Again, thinking in this cultural perspective, and making sure that everybody is doing the same. I was trying to build a really clever kind of link to one of the slides Claire had earlier on for this next point, and I failed miserably, so I'm just going to own that. But be really aware, particularly if you are male and running a meeting or in a leadership position, don't assign what I would say are gender traditional roles to women in the room. Note-taking, organizing social events, men can do that too. They probably need the practice. Okay, I wasn't expecting that, but thank you. And then part of the big message of why we're here, and kind of the experiences that I've had, is to make sure that you're learning about and listening to women around you so that you can be aware and work to make things better. The last 2 points I want to make before I hand over to Missy to wrap up. One of the interesting data points that I came across actually in my Weld experience is that when you look at boards, it takes at least 3 women on a board to make a difference and to start making that difference. So keep that in mind. Particularly, we want to avoid the token woman, token anything scenario. We need to drive this forward. And then lastly, this is a note to women. Make sure that you're leveraging the allies that are around you. And you will know when you find an ally based on the behavior of those people. And you may have different allies for different areas and different topics. But really lean on them, even if it means that they end up standing waving flags in front of a room full of people.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up. We have a little activity that we're going to do here in just a second. It's important to remind ourselves that many small, meaningful actions can make the biggest difference. You don't need to do all the things. Dave gave a wonderful list of things. You don't need to do all of them, but do some of them, and do some of them in a meaningful way. The idea here is you don't have to be perfect. So let's take a page from Marie Curie's playbook. Let perfection go, just pick something you can do and be intentional with your actions. So why am I so passionate about this topic? Well, it's personal to me. You see, I'm a mom of 2 girls, and I want them to have a different experience. I want them to choose a job in tech if that's what they should like. And this should be personal to all of you too, because women in tech is good for all of us. Okay, so we are getting some papers passed out here. We have an activity that we're going to do, so you should get a blank piece of paper. How many of you all remember how to make a paper airplane? Awesome. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a paper airplane here. I did say we were going on a journey, so we're going to need some transportation here. Okay, so if you need a refresher on how to make a paper airplane, you're going to fold your paper in half here, make a crease down the center, like a hot dog bun, okay? Then you are going to fold the top 2 corners toward the center crease. This feels really good to fold up my notes here. So you're going to fold it like this. So you're going to make a little triangle here at the top. Okay, then you're going to fold it one more time in towards the crease. So it should look like this. Okay, and then you're going to fold it in half here. So here you go. You've got your plane like this, and then you're going to make some wings by folding down the top to the bottom. Okay, paper airplane, got it? Good job. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, if we could go back to the slides. Can I go back? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so once you have your paper airplane, you're going to write on it one thing you learned today that you want to share or discuss with a colleague, or one thing you can do to reduce the gender gap. So our idea here is that we really want to keep this conversation going. So once we're done writing our thing on our paper airplane, we're all going to throw our paper airplanes to the back of the room. I know, you're dying to throw this paper airplane. I get it. And I want you all to leave with a different airplane so we can keep this conversation going outside of this room. And we're not going to do a traditional Q&A session here at the end, but feel free if you want to have conversation with Dave and I. Come chat with us. We just really want to keep this conversation flowing. Are you folding up your notes? We'll give everybody another minute or so to write on your plane here. Feel free to doodle on it if you are so inclined. I had lots of fun making doodles for this presentation. Okay, how are we doing? Does everybody have something written on their airplane?
Suspense is killing me.
Okay, show me some thumbs up if you're ready for this. Yep, looks like I got a lot of thumbs up here. Okay. All right, so here's how this is gonna work. We're going to stand up and we're gonna aim toward the back of the room. Okay. And I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, and then when I say blast off, that is when you're going to throw your paper airplane. And remember, pick a different paper airplane as you leave the session. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, blast off. Awesome. Good job. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Please come have conversation with us. We appreciate all of you.